It's a tough job, sitting in a cab, underground, long stretches, weekends, awkward shifts. They will pay what the market bears.
Well, exactly. And of course, this story is coming at the time that a storm is brewing, a storm of outrage is brewing over MPs getting a pay increase from their £82,000 a year salary. But what you've got to bear in mind is that being a tube driver is a much less skilled and much more secure role than that of a Member of Parliament. So it's interesting that these two stories are coming out in the very same week. I have to say, Colin, that I have little sympathy for the tube drivers. They're causing immense disruption at a time when commuter levels have obviously plummeted thanks to the pandemic. We don't yet know if they're going to rise again to pre-pandemic levels, but I think we can assume they're probably not, that working from home for some workers is now here to stay. So it's a denial of that basic reality that commuter numbers are falling. It's a problem that's not going to go away, and it's a problem that... And their response to this problem is going to turn more Londoners away from the tube, of course. People will identify new ways of getting to work, be that on a bus or a bike. And we know from previous tube strikes that some people who identify new methods of getting to work actually stick with those methods once the disruption has ended. So it's turning more people away from the tube. And we've had plenty of that already with all the mask theatre that went on the London Underground, and for far longer than it did on ordinary rail services. So there's a lot that's being done to turn commuters away. Those commuter numbers are already falling. And the pay and the fact that tube drivers are probably going to be working fewer hours in the future is a reality that many workers are having to face across our economy.
The London Underground, we'll get Stephen Pound's contrary view on this a little later on this hour, but it does feel like a last bastion of an old type of trades union, highly regulated marketplace where it is almost a monopolistic provider. But as you say, it's not, because actually there is no direct alternative to the tube, but actually people will go on their e-scooters or their bikes, or they'll get an Uber or whatever it is. There is always an alternative.
There is indeed, and this is exactly why we ought to support the rise of e-scooters and other innovations that are going to enable people to do that last mile or last couple of miles of their commute. I'm all for people identifying new ways of getting to work, but that doesn't mean to say that the disruption hasn't been immense this week, that commuters will either have been forced to work from home or will have had very difficult journeys into work that will have impacted their productivity. And again, this is at a time when working from home is on the rise, when businesses are just getting back on their feet after the pandemic. So the timing is absolutely awful, and there's no obvious solution to this beyond either paying tube drivers more, but that would be an artificial measure, or we move towards automation and at greater speed, which actually accelerates their decline in hours and potentially down the line decline in pay.
Too much, too little about right?
No, I've got absolutely no problem with the tube drivers earning as much as they can. What I have a real problem is the ineptitude of the current RMT leadership. And I think difficulties at the moment they're losing the argument. And I think, Mick Lynch is in danger of being sort of the Arthur Scargill of the trade union movement nowadays. You talk to people out there, they don't understand what this is about. They know that we've got well-paid tube drivers, as they should be. But the real situation is, what terrifies me is the prospect of a one-person operation, which could be... When I was driving a bus, they used to say to me, you've got 76 bags of blood and bone behind you. You're driving a tube, you've got 1,200 people behind you. And I think the real problem there is, firstly, I don't want to go down that route. The second thing is the RMT. I mean, you've got, Eddie Dempsey posing with warlords and Steve Headley posing with a Russian hat.
These are senior RMT trade union officials.
Well, they're the senior,
Well, seen with figures linked to Putin, not necessarily. Well,
I'm sorry, with Eddie Dempsey, he was actually with this chap. He's no longer with us, but he was the leader of the anti-Ukrainian and leadership in Donbass region. So the problem is that they've got a problem there. Now, look, I think the other problem they have is that they're absolutely going flat out attacking Sadiq Khan, and they're saying to Sadiq Khan, go to Boris Johnson, go to Grant Shapps and get more money. Well, what? You know, wake up and smell the coffee. You can't just go and say, we want more money. You've got to make the case. Now, the problem is, at the moment, just as the miners went on strike, you know, when there was huge coal stocks and the weather was quite reasonable, the RMT are going on strike when we're suffering a catastrophic fall in revenue on London Transport because of the pandemic. This is not the time to be doing. And then to come back on this mantra, we kept London moving. Yeah, there are 5 million people use the tube every day. Not in the last year there haven't been. And as for who kept things going during the pandemic, what about the health workers? You know, what about the police? What about all those other people? And I'm sorry, I passionately support the unions. I don't support the current way in which the RMT is making the case, because I think they're losing the argument and they're opening the door to a punitive government response, which will, and in many ways, they've opened the RMT have opened that door for the government.